Hi there! Welcome to a new episode of the Synth project where we are going to build a synth together. Since the synth we are going to build is modular, I need to have ready a rack where to insert all the modules I'm going to make over time. Today I will show you my economical solution for building a rack that can be easily expanded in the future if the need arises. Let's jump right away on it. Thank you for watching. Hi there! I am Carlo Carrano and this is Electronics Engineering Made Easy. You know already that I am definitely not someone who could do good woodworking. Remember my term in V2 case, right? But I need one, and so I had to figure out a good and easy way to make it. After thinking different solutions, at the end I found some pre-finished wooden shelves that I could use for the project. I selected those that had the most appropriate size for my project, made a few sketches on how they should be put together, and finally came up with a solution that I believe works best for me. Here is the final design for a 2-shelf rack. There are 2 4-foot long boards that I used as the side walls for the rack, and 6 3-foot long boards used to make the actual shelves for the rack. The front edge of these boards have also the extra purpose of acting as rails on which to fix the synth modules as I make them. And that's why the section in the middle has 2 boards against each other. Basically, the 2 top boards make up the top shelf and the 2 rails for attaching the modules, and the 2 bottom shelves make up the bottom shelf of the rack along with the 2 rails for it. All the boards are 7.5 inches deep, which is more than enough space for the circuitry, and they are also 5/8 of an inch thick, which is enough to hold small screws to keep the modules in place. These are the 2 kinds of shelves that I decided to use to make the rack. The longer one, as we have seen in the diagram, will be used for the 2 sides of the rack. All the other shelves, 6 of them, will be used for the top, the bottom, the back, and for those in between, which will complete the shape of the rack while also providing the rails where to screw the modules of the synth. These instead are the screws I will be using to hold all the pieces together. They have a small head, and so that it will go inside the panel and will not be seen from the outside. Unfortunately, all these boards came with label stickers. Although not too difficult to remove them, it still was a boring job to do, and the labels, once removed, left behind some glue that I had to clean up. Good thing I learned that the WD-40 is capable of doing that very easily. Once I cleaned the boards from the labels and the glue, I started aligning the pieces to assemble the rack. Especially for the first pieces, it is relatively difficult because you need to pay attention so that all the pieces are squared with each other. And since I was doing this job by myself, alone, I had to use some masking tape to hold loosely some of the boards while I was working on them. Well, lack of other tools. To attach the pieces to each other, I used the screws I showed you before. However, before using them, I drilled holes with a diameter just below the one of the screws, and this is a trick that avoids the boards from splitting when the screw is inserted along their edge. To put the screws in, I started with a screwdriver equipped with the right shape for the head of the screw, but I soon got bored and decided to use the drill itself to put the screws in place, much faster I guess. This meant changing continuously from the drill bit to the screwdriver head, but it was still faster than using a manual screwdriver. After mounting the first 3 boards, the 2 sides and the top, I attached the first back panel. Doing so makes the structure stronger, so it can be easily moved to mount the other boards, but it also provides the right distance to position the next board that completes the top shelf of the rack and acts as the bottom rail of it. The back panel was attached at 2 ends to the side panels, but it was also attached to the top shelves. This solution contributes to the sturdiness of the construction. Once the backboard was in place, I lifted the whole piece to check that the construction looked the way I expected and that was sturdy enough. Then I put it back on the floor and started working on attaching the next board, the lower part of the top shelf. To make sure I was putting it in the right position, I used yet another board to keep the first one square with the rest of the structure. Then again I drilled the holes for the screws and put the screws in. And since I had some problems aligning the screws with the edge of the board, I decided to use a piece of masking tape on the other side to help me put the screws in the correct position as a guide. Next I took another board to make the top part of the second shelf of the rack. Again, this is done to have enough thickness to attach the synth modules on both the top and the bottom shelf of the rack. Next thing I did was to drill a hole through the two boards. This hole will be used to allow the power cables to go through, so that I can power up the modules on the bottom and the top shelf simultaneously with the same power switch. And here is the rack upside down. I put it that way so I could drill holes and put screws to physically connect the board to the back panel, similarly to what I did with the top panel. At this point, the structure was sturdy enough to be able to make it stand on one side, and so I could work on attaching the second back panel in a much more comfortable position. The procedure for connecting the second back panel, the one for the bottom shelf of the rack, was exactly the same. First the holes and then the screws, obviously paying attention on putting all the pieces fleshed and perpendicular to each other. Putting in position the last board, which is the bottom part of the second shelf, was a little harder than the others, because I didn't have any other board to use as a reference for putting it perfectly square. I therefore had to use an actual square tool, and I had to use more masking tape to hold everything in place while I was drilling the holes and putting the screws in. With my primitive woodworking skills, I'm still not sure how I did all that work without making any mistake. I guess I'm learning. After attaching the bottom shelf to the sides, I connected it also to the back board, again to make the structure more rigid. And finally I made another hole through the bottom, corresponding to the other one I made on the middle section, so that I can go through with the power cable also on this shelf. Once the construction of the rack was done, I started thinking that the rack deserves a little extra touch, a brand name plaque like the big names in musical instruments. And why not? Isn't this going to be at the same level of big brands in the market? Well, and so I did a little more work for branding the rack. Nowadays, making at home a nice plate with some inscription on it is not a difficult thing to do. You just need some decal paper, the kind that can be printed with a laser printer like this one. Then you need an actual aluminum plate, like this one I bought on Amazon, that is usually put on doors to push them open without touching the wood. And last, you need a simple graphic editor to print something nice on top of the decal paper, like the name of my channel. And so I did. I printed the Lanisi.com brand name on the decal paper, and I sprayed a fixative spray on it so I would not get ruined with the water or when I touch it. I let the paint dry, and then I sprayed another layer and then a third one to make sure that the ink would not detach or be scraped out of the paper. Then I used a sharp knife to cut the paper to fit the aluminum plate. Next step was to remove the plastic sheet protection from the aluminum plate, and then I put the decal on it to figure out the exact position where it is going to stay. And I used some masking tape to mark the position both at the sides and on the top and the bottom. A ruler helped me to make sure the position was well centered. I then took a container large enough to fit the label, filled with some water, and put the decal in it to lose the glue and allow the decal to slide away from the piece of paper. At that point I positioned the decal on top of the aluminum plate, and really carefully I started to slide over it the thin film with the printout. Once the top part was firmly in place on the plate, I slowly slid away the paper, and the film settled alone on the plate. At that point it was just a matter of using a little plastic card, like a credit card or something similar, to remove all the imperfections from the film, smooth it out, along with the air underneath and the water. and this is a process that needs to be done calmly and steadily to avoid breaking the film in the process. Once the film was attached and smoothed out, I used a piece of paper to dry out the water from the top of it, and the plate, of course. And then some more smoothing, and finally I removed the masking tape. Since there was some little part that needed to be further smoothed out, I worked a little bit more with the plastic card, and at times also with my own fingers. Now the film is really prone to scratches when touched, so to avoid any damage, I sprayed on top of it and the whole plate some transparent paint. 3 layers, again, like I did for the decal paper, and waited a few hours for the paint to set completely. I wanted the plate to be centered on the back of the rack, so I took some measurements to mark the center position of the plate. Then I used a square to lay the plate horizontally on the wood, marked the position of the holes for the screws, and used some masking tape to hold it in place while I was putting the screws. So I checked again at this point for the position of the plate, made a few more adjustments, and then I drilled holes in the wooden boards, and finally I locked the plate in place with some screws, first the ones in the center and then the others. I did not tighten the screws all the way at the beginning, only after I put them all in place I tightened them up. This was just an extra precaution to avoid moving the plate in the process. And this is the front of the finished rack, with its 2 shelves that will host all the synth modules. This instead is the back of the rack, with the brand plate proudly showing off in the center of it. Next time, we will work some more on the electrical finishing of the rack, the EMI shielding and the power rails. And then we will start designing and making the modules that will nicely sit on the rack itself. There is still a lot of work to do, and I am looking forward to making this thing working. The good part is that I can start using the modules right away, as soon as I build them. I won't need to wait for everything to be done before being able to make some noise. And I will keep making new modules based on the moment need and on my fantasy and yours. Don't forget that you are supposed to help bring comments and ideas. This is our project after all, not just mine. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next video, and as usual, happy experiments!